This meeting is being recorded.
All right, thanks for joining us, folks, for the February 10th Manuel Corrales Task Force meeting. Today, to get us started, we are fortunate to have, as we have many months, but in a more expanded capacity today, fortunate to have Matt Pelican with us to give us a presentation on invertebrate biodiversity inside of Manuel Corrales. Matt is the director of the MV Atlas of Life. He's a community naturalist and has been an Oak Bluffs resident since 1997. He's committed countless hours to the study of wildlife groups, including birds, butterflies, tiger beetles, just to name a few, as well as bees on Martha's Vineyard, and has really worked in a range of capacity out here to, to kind of underpin his experience. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Matt. Thanks again for, putting together some materials to unpack with us, and you should have some co-hosting privileges now as well.
Okay, great. I will, thanks for that, Dan. I will share my screen and we'll be off and running. We all seeing that? Okay, great. Yeah. So I will have to say that the first thing I did was narrow the topic down to insects because there are plenty of them to start with. And I don't know much about a lot of other invertebrate groups, but that'll be the topic today. And a couple of key things to note about Corrales from the perspective of really conservation of anything or diversity of anything, but insects in particular, would include the very large size, the general continuity of its condition. It really hasn't ever been thoroughly mucked up by human activity. The fact that it sits on a geologically unusual glacial outwash plain that's situated right on the coast. You can think of that as being the intersection of two very narrow linear landscape features, so it's a very rare convergence. And primarily, it's got prominent vegetation types that are what we call representative of the barrens complex or barrens communities that are usually found on lean soils, droughty soils, and in areas where they're prone to disturbance, including fire, and in our case, salt spray and wind, and even drought, because it can get mighty droughty out there. And the state forest is noted for its many state-listed species. It's more than 30. I don't know the exact number at this point, but it's a hotbed of unusual biodiversity and a very important conservation resource for Massachusetts. In terms of insects, a couple of things that are important to think about. First of all, is that many of them have very specific ecological requirements. And we usually don't think of insects as being highly specialized things, but they may, for requiring a particular plant or particular soil characteristics, they may have very, very specific conditions under which they're able to survive. And most insect species exhibit really uneven reproductive success. So only a very small percentage, a lot of times, of females will successfully reproduce. And those two factors end up resulting in often a very patchy distribution of insects. And this is one of the reasons why size is so important with Corrales. That if you have patches, little small populations of an insect or indeed of a plant or anything else that are small and not really very stable, they tend to blink out over time. If you only got one of those populations and it disappears, you're screwed. That species is gone. But if you've got a large enough area for there to be a bunch of suitable locations for a particular species, and if one of those populations blinks out, there are still other ones that can recolonize the area. So that what biologists call a metapopulation dynamic of multiple subpopulations, each of which might be temporary, but they combine to produce a permanent and long and stable over the long term big population. And this is just one species that exemplifies that. It's the grasshopper Melanopolis bivitatus, the two-spotted grasshopper. And I came across a patch of, in the space of about a square meter, about 35 freshly hatched individuals of this species. And over the next few years, I could always find two-striped grasshoppers in that area. It's sort of that was the reproductive offspring of that one female sort of set up one of these small populations. And a sort of corollary of this is that if you go looking for insects, there's a kind of a crapshoot element to it, that you walk into the state forest, and if you happen to come across an aggregation like that, it's like, oh, two-striped grasshopper is a really common insect in Corellis. But if you walk into a different part of the state forest where the species just happens to be absent, you can walk around all day and not see a single one, and you would conclude that, well, two-striped grasshopper is a really rare species in Corellis State Forest. So an accurate assessment takes a long time and a lot of effort over a long time in order to get reliable data. Things are highly fungible from 1 year to another, highly variable from 1 year to another. And you need to account for that in surveying. I'm going to move something here on my desktop. Thank you. At the very lowest, simplest level, diversity can simply mean the number of species that are present in a particular area. And because so few insect groups have been well studied in Corellis, we really can't say. I couldn't even to an order of magnitude tell you how many species of insects occur there. But we're working on it. And one of the tools is this platform, iNaturalist. And you can see that in iNaturalist, we've got about 4,100 insect observations representing about 800 species currently. Those numbers will grow continuously over time. And that 800 or 795 species figure is probably a relatively small percentage, relatively small fraction of the number that are actually occurring there. iNaturalist is the data are a little bit biased towards species that are charismatic or easy to spot or easy to photograph, but it's better than nothing, and it's kind of what we have at this point for a lot of insect groups in the total number of species, that very basic level of biodiversity, is actually not all that impressive in Corellis. I think it's good, but the habitat in Corellis is fairly homogeneous. We don't have wetlands, for example, and so the absolute number of species is not all that high. But the claim to fame of the forest is the quality of its diversity, with a lot of species associated with these relatively rare Barrens habitats, and in particular the scrub oak, Quercus ilicifolia, which has a bunch of state listed, I think it's something like about 16 state listed moss species associated with it. I'm not even going to talk about moths. I really don't know very much about them, and everybody kind of knows that this is the one of the main groups in Corellis. But this is the plant that is the basis of all of that. Another way to think about diversity, and I should say that in lieu of trying to really characterize how many species occur there, I'm going to talk about some different concepts of diversity and how you might think about diversity in a place like Corellis. And if the raw number of species is one of those ways, you can think in terms of suites of species or guilds of species, where you have a bunch of species that are taxonomically close to each other or functionally similar in their ecological requirements. And if you've got a lot of species that are like that, then you can say you've got pretty high diversity at this level of taxonomy or function. So a good example would be the elfin species in, wish I could make this go away. There we go. There we go. That's a little bit better. Yeah, so we have, instead of just one elfin species, this genus Calophrus, we've got four, and they're all early spring. They overlap in their flight periods substantially, and they're all associated with barrens habitats, but they each have a different host plant in Corellis. So eastern pine elfin in the upper right, which feeds mostly on pitch pine in Corellis, as far as I can tell, although I've seen it ovipositing on white pine as well. Hoary elfin, which the larvae feed on bearberry, frosted elfin in the lower left, which is rare and possibly extirpated. It's been a number of years since I've seen it in Corellis, but to the extent that it does occur there, it feeds on wild indigo. And then the blueberry feeding brown elfin, which is very common in the upper left-hand corner. And robber flies, the family Acylidae, are another good example, another good illustration of this kind of sort of low-level taxonomic diversity in Corellis. There are 24 known species of acylids on the vineyard, and 15 of them, or 62.5%, occur in Corellis. So a lot of the island's diversity occurs there, and many of the species that I find in Corellis are really barren species. If not, they're tolerant, or if not requiring barrens habitats in order to flourish. One of these is Certopogon marginalis here, which I almost invariably find on bare sand, mineral sand, like this one is perching on. And I've seen the females ovipositing or laying eggs in loose sand, so it's a very, very close association. Another one is Laphria champlainii, which people would probably consider a pretty rare species, but it actually is fairly common in Corellis, particularly in the eastern half of the state forest, where I find them on areas where scrub oak ends abruptly at the edge of a mowed fire lane, and they perch on leaves of scrub oak like this mating pair is doing, and they perch hunt for insects that are sort of following that structural feature of the wall of scrub oak along the fire lane. And Corellis is one of the very few places that is known to actually be a stronghold for this species, where it is regularly found and reported. This is not really a barren species, but it's a great bug, and I just had to include it. Laphria grossa is a huge, huge, huge predatory fly, up to 1.5 inches in length. The only record I'm aware of from Martha's Vineyard came from a big patch of scrub oaks in the West Tisbury portion of Corellis. And Macamus nova scotiae is another barren species that occurs up and down much of the East Coast, is rare pretty much everywhere it's found. And again, all of the vineyard records for this species come from Corellis. So these are examples of functionally related and actually taxonomically related. They're all members of the same family, but this sort of diversity of similar and related species that are very, very diverse in Corellis. Another way to think about biodiversity is how a particular site plays into supporting biodiversity at the local level. Let's call it the Martha's Vineyard Island level. And a lot of times with Corellis, you find that a disproportionate, or maybe even all of the records for a taxon come from Corellis. It's like there are no other Martha's Vineyard records for that species. And grasshoppers are a really good illustration of that. This one, Melanoplis keeleri, is a species I find pretty routinely on the fire lanes, but there are relatively few records from anywhere else on the island, and by far the bulk of the island's population appears to occur in Corellis, where you find them in areas where there is scrub oak with a good admixture of grasses and forbs. Sphragum balli is another one, Ball's grasshopper. This is another one that you find on the fire lanes in areas where there is bare soil with little blue stem nearby, which is probably an important food plant for this grasshopper. The only other place outside of Corellis that I've had this on Martha's Vineyard was in that little section of mowed scrub oak across the West Tisbury Road from the end of the airport runway. So just outside the confines of the state forest, it's basically confined to Corellis here. And Chloealtis conspersa, even though it's not common in Corellis, hasn't, as far as I know, been recorded anytime in recent decades anywhere else on the vineyard than in Corellis. So pretty much confined to Corellis as far as the island is concerned. And then finally, just one last example would be the pygmy grasshopper, different from the other ones that we've looked at. Nomatetics cristatus, tiny little job, and I find them in the spring primarily along the fire lanes, where I actually think that they're using the short and absent vegetation of the fire lanes as a landscape feature for them to concentrate along for purposes of meeting mates. So I think the fire lanes are actually something that benefit this species. What they do the rest of the year, I really don't know, because I only have a few observations from any time other than the spring. But again, aside from a couple of records at Hoff Farm and a couple at Long Point, all of the island records of this species come from Corellis. And if we did away with Corellis somehow, this species would probably disappear pretty quickly from the entire island. So it's an example of the role that Corellis plays in supporting biodiversity at the local level, population in the Corellis that are essential for the stability and perpetuation of species on Martha's Vineyard. But Corellis also has ecological importance at the regional or global level. And this is where it really gets kind of interesting, I think. This is a grasshopper called Hesperotetics viridis brevipennis. It's a subspecies of a grasshopper that's really primarily a western and southwestern species, but there are about 4 or 5 subspecies across the country. And this one in particular, brevipennis, is in the northeast, and it's isolated from the rest of the subspecies. And it's a pretty good candidate for elevation to full species, in which case it would probably be Hesperotetics brevipennis, something like that. A guy down in Mississippi is studying these, and hopefully we'll find out the true status of this taxon sometime soon. Most, not all, but most of the vineyard records for this grasshopper come from Corellis, and the only other place in Massachusetts where it appears to be found is in the very similar habitat in Miles Standish State Forest up in Plymouth. And if you see the records of this species from iNaturalist, you can see that as far as casual observers have been able to demonstrate in recent years, this may be the current extent of this taxon. So it's fair to say that Corellis, whatever this is, it's a species or a subspecies, Corellis State Forest is important for maintaining the entire global population of this grasshopper. There really only appears to be one other stronghold, and when you're down to one stronghold for a species, that's a very precarious state of affairs. And then I'll finish up with this example, which is one of my favorite insects of all time, Microdon fulgens. And it's a member of a truly bizarre genus of hoverflies, or what are commonly called flower flies, because the adults like to visit, almost universally like to visit flowers to take pollen and nectar. One weird thing about Microdon is that they don't do that. The adults don't seem to have any interest at all in flowers. And another is that the larval stage of all microdons develop underground as parasites in the nests of ants. And there is a very, very close relationship between a microdon species and the ant species that host it. And often it's only one species that is doing the hosting. And presumably what's happened is that the fly larvae have evolved the ability to mimic the chemical signals by which ants learn to recognize each other. So ants are really good at either killing or evicting any foreign kind of species that turns up in their nests. But certain species have learned how to game the system like Microdon does by mimicking the chemical signals that ants are using to recognize each other. So therefore, the definition of any microdon species is governed primarily by the presence of its ant host species. You don't have the ant host, you don't have the fly. So in the case of microdon fulgens, it's an ant called Polyergus lucidus on the upper left there, very attractive ant. But it gets weirder because Polyergus is a genus that enslaves other ant species. Polyergus has lost the ability to fend for itself. They can't really forage. They don't have the instinct for bringing food back to the nest. So what they do is they go on raiding expeditions and they capture individuals of another ant species. And again, it's always a very close relationship between enslavers and slaves in the ant world, and specifically an ant called Formica incerta that is the slave of Polyergus lucidus. So the distribution of microdon fulgens doesn't just depend on one species of ant, it actually depends on two species of ants that are involved in this separate, really bizarre ecological relationship. So all the records for Formica incerta that I'm aware of come from Karela State Forest, which offers really, really good habitat for it. It likes dry, sandy soil, and of course that's what we've got in Karelus. The presence of Formica incerta allows for the presence of Polyergus lucidus, and the presence of Polyergus lucidus allows for the presence of microdon fulgens. But it gets even weirder. These are maps indicating the distribution of microdon fulgens. That, if you can see my cursor, that Nebraska record is probably a spurious one. It's a dead one that was picked out of the grill on an automobile, so who knows where it came from. This one in northwestern Georgia is probably good. The one in Missouri is probably good, but for all intents and purposes, Microdon fulgens is a Barron's fly of the East Coast. And my guess is that it probably occurred as a large metapopulation running up and down the coast from Florida, which is the one stronghold species of the species, all the way up to at least southern New England. And at the present day, it still continues to be a fairly common species down in Florida. But aside from a couple of records in eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey, the only records from the Northeast are from Martha's Vineyard. So if you think of the distribution of a fly covering that many degrees of latitude, there's got to be a lot of difference within that species. The ones in the north are subject to freezing temperatures and a much shorter growing season and different soil types and different vegetation than the ones down south. So there is undoubtedly a measure of diversity within that species. Whether it rises to the level of actually definable subspecies is a different question. But it seems inescapable that the microdon fulgens from the Northeast are slightly different beasts from the ones down in Florida. And to the extent that that's true, to the extent that there is any distinction to the New England population of that fly, as far as we know, it only persists in Karela State Forest. So again, the unique characteristics of Karelus allow it to be the last sort of known repository for a really, really bizarre set of ecological relationships. I think that's just super cool. So to summarize, the large size of Karelus supports metapopulation dynamics, which allows for the long-term security of many patchily distributed species. The basic diversity in terms of the number of species in Karelus is good but not great, somewhat constrained by the dominance of a relatively narrow selection of soil types and associated plant communities. However, those communities support a really high diversity of specialized insects, including a lot of rare ones at the state or even the global level. And so this is really why Karelus has got its reputation, which is extremely well deserved as a hotbed of important biodiversity. And that's what I've got for you today. And I will stop sharing and yeah.
And Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. You packed a lot in there. I'm glad this is being recorded because I plan to watch it again.
Yeah, I put a lot of text into the PowerPoint thinking that it might be something that would have utility beyond today's presentation. So maybe we can post it somewhere. I don't know.
Before the presentation, I didn't know any of these species could rise to the stature of beasts, but then you told me some are enslaving others, and I've changed my mind altogether on that count.
You have no idea the stuff that goes on out there, Dan.
No, I don't. Oh, that was a gateway factoid for sure. Um, does anyone, and I'll open this up to the, um, you know, larger public as well. Does anyone have any questions for Matt? All right, Tom.
Yeah,
I
thanks,
probably
Dan. Thanks, Matt. Another great presentation as always. A couple of sessions ago, these meetings, somebody asked the question, why do we care about biodiversity? And you just made a great case for the intrinsic value of biodiversity, just the fascination of species. But I wonder if you could say a few words about some of the functional benefits of biodiversity, particularly with insects. And of course, I'm thinking about things like pollinators and such. But what are some of the benefits of biodiversity that those who aren't intrigued, as you and I are, with wildlife, what benefits them?
I get your question. That's a question that I almost hate to answer because I don't see the need to go beyond the intrinsic value of these species. And if you don't get it, then I'm sorry, But I will talk a little bit about the presence of pollinators. And again, if you remember back to the beginning of my importance of pollinators in particular, going back to the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that a lot of insects have very close ecological associations with things. And pollinators are among those insects. We don't really think of it ordinarily, but a lot of pollinators are closely associated with a relatively small number of particular plant species. So while there are things like the common eastern honeybee or bumblebee, Bombus impatiens, which will visit pretty much anything, at the other extreme, there are bees like Melita melitoides, which essentially only visits one species of an ericaceous shrub called Lionia ligostrina. And then there are a bunch of species that pretty much only pollinate members of one genus or one plant family. So the genus Calides, it's full of ones that members of the species that are associated with goldenrod, particularly. So if you start losing those species, you start losing the pollination services for particular plants, and the plant diversity starts to decline, and then you start losing more insect diversity, and you end up with kind of a whirlpool effect where one loss of diversity ends up causing other losses of diversity in an ever accelerating spiral. So the whole thing hangs together. And I mean, the example of Microdon fulgens and its ant host and that ant's host is just a good example or a sort of cautionary tale about how things are connected in ways that aren't immediately visible. I mean, if we lose the enslaved ant, we lose the slaved ant and the slaveholding ant, and then we lose Microdon. So the natural world is composed of really complicated interconnections, and you pull anything out of that, and you run the risk of important things starting to disappear. So I hope that's a satisfactory answer, but again, I really don't think anybody should need to go beyond the intrinsic value and the right of these species that have evolved to continue existing.
Other questions, comments? Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That was really helpful and a selection of insects that you're following. From a climate standpoint perspective, what are you looking for as signals that our changing environment is going to affect Corellis? What do you see on the land? Are you expecting to see certain things?
Really good question. And yeah, I would expect to see changes. And in fact, we are already seeing climate-related changes in the insect populations on Martha's Vineyard. Really good examples come from the butterflies, where a number of species, sachem skipper, Zabulon skipper, a couple of others, red-banded hairstreak, that were absent on the vineyard except as very, very rare vagrants a couple of decades ago are now really well established here as they extend their range northward. A lot of insects, the example of Orthoptera, the crickets and katydids. They're very sensitive to growing season length because they're large insects and they only have one generation per year, but they have to fit that entire generation in from hatching from an egg to growing to maturity and reproducing into a growing season. So as growing seasons get longer, it becomes possible for other species to move northward and extend their range northward. At the same time, there will be other species that start to lose their host plants or other factors that they need. The hoary elfin, which I mentioned as being a bearberry associate, bearberry is kind of marginal on the vineyard at this point. It's really a much more northern and high elevation plant. And although it does occur to the south of us, it is kind of a species that is a little bit of a glacial relic here. And it wouldn't surprise me too much if that started to get less common in the coming decades as the climate got warmer. Presumably the limiting factor would be it might be the need for a particular duration of freezing weather in the winter like blueberries have. It might be hot temperatures in the summer that gets to be problematic for it. But obviously, if we lose that host plant, we also lose the butterfly that's associated with it. So there will be changes in the insect fauna, some of them related to the plant fauna and some of them unrelated to the changes in the plants on the vineyard. But climate change is definitely going to be a deal changer on Martha's Vineyard. We have a weird mix of sort of northern relic species left over from our geological history as the edge of glaciation and the fact that we were formed by the Ice Age. And then also southern species that are here because of our relatively mild marine moderated climate. And I think the balance between those two groups of species is going to shift over time with the southern ones starting to gain more precedence.
Great question. I mean, we're such a crossroads. The oak species seem to be a real keystone for Corellis in the vineyard. How do we see that a change potentially from climate change? How far south can you find that same kind of oak barrens currently in the U.S.?
It's interesting. I was down a number of years ago, was down on the Lake Wales Ridge in central Florida and out in a scrub oak barn. It was a different scrub oak, but it was structurally very similar to our scrub oak. And I was finding some of the same butterflies, like a sleepy dusky wing, that I find in scrub oak barrens on the vineyard. So, we already have southern species like post oak, which is fairly common on the vineyard, and over the incoming decades, that species may become increasingly prevalent. And oaks are really, really resilient and adaptable species. I think most of our oak species, their range extends pretty far to the south of us, so they're probably going to be fairly secure as climate change increases. I wouldn't mind seeing some additional oak species get established here. They're wonderful plants and they support a huge amount of biodiversity. So if we get some additional species or if some of the uncommon ones like post oak become more prevalent, that's going to sort of broaden the base that's supporting our insect biodiversity.
All right, thank you.
Matt, I think you said something to the effect of, the species with the more resplendent colors are often the ones that get identified, through iNaturalist. Um, for starters, iNaturalist, that's something that's widely available, right? It's not a unique, just vineyard centric tool, right?
Yeah, I'll give you the 50-cent summary. It is a global database for the study of biodiversity. You establish an account and you can submit photographs and sound recordings. There is artificial intelligence that helps you identify the photographs. There are human users who are experts in their field who help you identify both the sounds and the photographs. Each observation has, in addition to the photograph, a date and a location and other information associated with it, all of which goes into this gigantic database, which is getting close to, I don't remember the exact figure, but it's getting close to 500 million observations worldwide. So it's a huge, huge database. It's free. Anybody can, even without an account, you can log onto it and explore that data using all the kinds of tools that you can typically use to analyze data in any sort of database. You can select records and so forth using various criteria. So I have set up, for example, what's called a project, which is a fixed set of filters in iNaturalist that just singles out observations from Corella State Forest. It's currently got something like 800, 1900 species in it. Easy to do, it's free, it doesn't pester you with junk mail, it doesn't sell your data. It's a great, even though it does have sort of built-in tendencies to bias data that you have to take into account, it still is a very, very powerful resource for studying biodiversity. And it's a way that anybody, even if you don't know what you're photographing, you can put a photograph in it and you're contributing to the global study of biodiversity. So thanks for asking about that. I'm a big booster.
Thanks for summarizing and showcasing, so much of this dimension inside Corellis. It often goes unsung. So it was a big benefit for us to have this today. I think in the interest of time, I'll move on and ask Jake from DCR if he has any updates on the white pine removal and habitat restoration project. How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing well, Dan. How are you?
Good. Hi, Paul. Good to have you both.
Hey, Dan. Hi, everyone.
So, full disclosure, my laptop charger's not working, so I'm working off my phone today. So, I apologize. I do not have as many resources as I would like right now, mainly my email, other than, on my phone, which I'm watching this on right now. So right now, I think the main things are, the housing, which we don't have an update on really right now.
Jake, actually, if you don't mind my jumping in, I did have
Please.
one brief update on that this morning. For those who don't know me, I'm the partnership director at DCR. I work with Jake. Kendra, who is the deputy commissioner who oversees our division, had a conversation with Senator Sear and raised the issue in that conversation about the housing issue that we've been talking about. And he expressed a willingness to be of help, which was appreciated. So they're looking at some language, I guess, to move that forward. I don't have any specifics, unfortunately, but Jake, I apologize. That just came up this morning. So I just want to share that with you.
Okay, because there have been attempts, through the legislative process to file bills that would allow for this, historically, couple different bills, and they've all sort of died on the vine. So, if we can.
I'm going to speculate, Dan. Don't hold me to this. I'm just guessing as someone who used to work in the legislature, and given the timing, they may be looking at doing this as opposed to a standalone bill as an add-on either to the Mass Ready Act or to the FY27 budget. You know, sometimes those outside sections are an easier, you know, they don't have to run the gamut of the full legislative process. I don't know that for a fact. I'm speculating. I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that might be the vehicle that he's using, which makes it sometimes a little easier than doing it as a standalone bill. But
well, it's encouraging if they're thinking about paths of least resistance, you know, to try to advance it. So, you know, appreciate any creative thinking around that. You know, just given how we haven't had success in the past. How about, I think it was January 30th, the deadline, the deadline came and went for bids to be submitted for the White Pine project. Anything to report on that front?
Jake, I do have an update on that as well. Sorry, Jake and I didn't get to chat, but before this meeting because of the technology issues. As you probably know, there was a bid. Only one bid was received. It was significantly over the anticipated budget for the project. So they're reformatting, retooling that proposal, and there'll be the expectation there'll be a second attempt to do that later this year, probably in the fall. So we'll keep you up to date on that. But that's the latest on that. The other issue that was raised, which I'll raise before you do, I think, relative to the forest management plan. I think at a previous meeting you had a conversation. I don't know if Pete Church was on or if the information was shared about a schedule. I spoke to Pete briefly. The schedule is expected to be through the end of that. This will be done by the end of 26. He didn't have a particular earmarks yet, or not earmarks. Sorry. Milestones. See, earmarks, I'm thinking legislative there. Milestones. But that is moving forward as well.
All right. Good to hear. Thanks for the updates on that item.
No problem.
Next we have, you know, mill operations. Obviously, you know, we've been keeping you up to date on our communication with bandsaw mill operators out here on the island. Bob, do you want to speak on this agenda item at all?
Sure.
You want me to try to summarize?
Sure, Dan. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah. By the way, I wasn't able with my upgrade, so-called, of this computer to fumble around and find. I had the video of Matt's, and then I lost it while I was fumbling around to get my lovely face on the machine. Anyway, we have been looking at, a couple of us, at Google Earth air photos by the hour, searching for a couple of acres that are not on top of a housing development, that are not, we're probably not going to be able to find commercially or industrially zoned land to set up these portable mills on. We've got 4 mills lined up on the vineyard, which maybe they're not all quite here yet, but that's a pretty healthy number to get some production once we start with the milling. But we're not finding spots. You look at Goodale's, he's got all kinds of leaseholds on his property. You look at, obviously, first off, the business park, and they were very gracious, but they have nothing to offer at this point. If we'd come a couple of years ago and gotten our foot in the door, we might have had a chunk there where Walter had his chainsaw business right on the corner there. What else? Dan has looked, I guess, into the transfer station. Is that right, Dan?
Well, we know it has restrictions on it because it's a development of regional impact here at MBC.
Yeah. And there are, of course, heritage restrictions all over the place, which we support, and particularly in the Outwash Plain, but that's not exclusively. But to have a site, if we could find one, an acre or two, that was within 3 or 4 or 5 miles of the ingress egress in the southeast corner which is where the trucks will go. We don't want to be going to Chilmark, where we've been offered some land to off of South Road, a couple of places in Chilmark, in fact. But that just doesn't cut it in terms of big trucks moving logs by the scores of loads down the road. But the fact that we have 4 mill operators and the potential for some real production of island timber for island homes, as I keep saying, island timber for island timber framed affordable homes, that's my bumper sticker, is great. Why ship off chips to Rochester to be turned into air pollution when we can make homes out of our own timber? And again, I have a white pine framed, white pine sheathed, what's the word? SIP insulating panels included, which are not white pine, but the inside and outside sheathing of the building is white pine, and the timber frame is all white pine, which is quite unusual. And it's in Vineyard Haven, and I've already offered to have people come look at it. And we've had a few people, including one builder and one sawmill operator, that accompanied Dan there with me in October when we showed it off. And those people are happy to have us show more people, architects, builders, whatever. If we, not that that would be the model, but it simply is a timber frame of a small size, beautifully assembled in a factory in Hardwick, Mass, was brought down here and erected in one day, except for the frame. Let's put it that way. Just the frame was erected in a single day. So we got some potential to use a resource here, and but we desperately need everyone's help in trying to find a suitable piece of land to set up the mills on. Sorry to be so long, but there's a lot of detail there.
Bob, was there a particular zone that you were curious about? Inquiring to DCR, whether or not.
Yeah, I did a little diligence online and found that indeed Forests and Parks does allow portable sawmills on their land temporarily to do milling operations, whether that timber is being used on the property or on properties, plural, of Forests and Parks, or whether it's being commercially, dealt with and leaves the property. They do let portable mills sit on their land. We've been told, I think here, way in the past, with this long process we're going through, someone seemed to indicate, oh no, you can't set up a mill on the property. Well, what's the mill imply? It implies smacking up the surface of the land a bit with a lot of logs piled up. It means some skidders, or not, I shouldn't use the term skidder, but some either Caterpillar or more likely huge wheeled vehicles, which would be the cutter feller device that snips a 16-inch white pine like you would a dandelion in your backyard, and it handles it with a claw and takes it and neatly piles it up. So my thought is, at first we were thinking, geez, why don't we do this along the easterly, if we could get permission from Heritage and the rest of them, put it along the easterly border. But that's not that wide. It's near the houses and the golf course. But my thought is, and I've talked to a few others who agree it might be something to consider, and would be to have, if we got permission, a couple of acres of the stand that we're removing. And we can grind those stumps. John Keene says he doesn't own it, but he can get hold of a machine that is not a chipper, but it will take stumps down to whatever level you want. And it takes them down, he said, like cutting butter with a table knife. So you've got a 3-inch stump, say, after the chainsaw has done its job. And the fire chiefs were urging, I think they slacked off a little bit on that the last meeting or two we had, in having them be very low elevation, but they can take them down as low as we want them. And that would be,
Bob,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could I try to extract the question out of that great context you gave?
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
I just don't want to lose DCR while we have them. I think the question was, given this RFP is not going to amount to work taking place in the winter of 2026, Jake, or this particular winter.
That's a relief.
Is there a possibility to revisit the forest as a potential place where the milling could take place, understanding that there's going to be insurance facets that have to be addressed, understanding that heritage will certainly need to be involved in the review, because of the habitat status. So, just given the timeline is kind of extended now, maybe that's an item that could be revisited, and just wanted to get your thoughts on that, Jake.
I mean, I don't see why not, personally, but it's something that. So I guess I'm a little confused by what the question is. So the question is basically, Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So the question is, there's interest in some of the harvest, and to put some of this to use. But one of the limiting factors is that there's really a finite amount of land to store and do the actual milling work, and it doesn't always match up with the scale of the harvest. So that in our outreach with the different mill operators, logistically things could be simplified somewhat, because the work could take place closer to on site to where the harvest is happening. And then B, I think the amount of the white pine that could be absorbed here on the island could be scaled up somewhat, beyond what they're currently able to sort of accommodate, if the wood had to be taken out of the forest altogether and brought to a separate site here on the vineyard.
Yeah. So, I know that there is a stipulation that, well, I believe it was 25% of the wood stays on island.
Right.
Now I'd have to look into how that would, change the bidding, because that was a little confusing to me as well, because, if the wood's being taken off island that can be used as a resource off island, would that make it more expensive because, you have to pay for the shipping cost of said wood, or would it make it cheaper because, you're not doing the work to bring it off island? So I am a little confused by that. I can look into it. I know that 25% was a minimum. It wasn't like, 25, a set in stone number.
Yeah.
And I know that's been in discussion for as long as I've been on this project as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's something we can look into. That being said, one concern I think for the community would be, can this wood be used the time of year that it's being cut down? Can we even do any work that time? So, I know the cost of just to store that wood is probably pretty expensive as well. So, it's definitely something that we can discuss. I don't see why not. But, I don't work in estimating, and I don't work in shipping or anything like that. So, it's something that would have to be talked about.
All right. Yeah, I appreciate that. If you could pass that along to Forestry Division, let them know that's a key item of interest that we'd like to further explore. That would really be great.
I'd be happy to be in on discussions along with maybe the millers and you folks, Jake, on those aspects. May I just say one more thing, Dan?
Yeah, but I do want to leave time for public comment, so quickly.
Just in response to Jake and the notion of shipping whole logs. Everyone I have talked to who's brought white pine to the vineyard, inexpensive Middleborough area white pine for decades, including myself, the house which I'm sitting in is made of it in part, but it says that for sure you can bring white pine very cheaply to the vineyard. You can't really afford to ship logs off island because it's mostly air and wicked expense. You can afford probably, whatever you is or we are, to afford to ship stacked green lumber off island to then be stickered and spaced and air dried properly, as we would do here. But so shipping whole logs seems not economical, in which case, if we have to get the stuff off here and it isn't being milled, it's got to go off as chips, which to some of us is an absolute ridiculous waste of a resource. Okay. So that's where we're thinking. Just let's utilize the resource here if we conceivably can. And if we have to ship some chips, then that's the case.
So, sorry, if you don't mind. I agree with you. That being said, I think, I would assume whatever, bidder is going to be cutting down these trees, some of the payment, I believe, and again, please don't quote me on this because I'm not 100% sure and I can find out, some of the payment would be in that resource. Otherwise, it would bring up the cost of the bid, but I'm not 100% sure. I can find out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jake. Carlos, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, hold on. You're on two devices. Maybe you could turn one of them off.
Hear me?
We hear you twice, Carlos.
Okay.
Can you turn off one of your two devices?
Well, I don't.
All right, try now.
How's that sound?
Better. Much better.
The question was this, and I'm really obviously Johnny come lightly to this discussion lately. Is the end game or the objective here basically limited to a sample clearing, I guess, and then processing of the wood, and that's it, or is there more to the objective?
We're trying to restore scrub oak barrens, by removing these parts of the forest that are, resemble plantations, and we also trying to take into account that it's going to produce a lot of material, and to the extent we can treat it as a resource and not waste, I think there's a good local benefit, as well as a global benefit to that.
And what is the restoration? Is it like, I guess, benign restoration, or is it something? Any proactive thoughts?
All natural. No planting.
Or seeding.
No seeding.
In other words, just let it come up. Well, in that case, there'd likely be a carpet, I guess, of chips and stuff like that. Might be, if there was a lot of that, it would, and there wasn't nothing proactive, it would be hard for things to establish, given that kind of blanket of material.
Just a fast recap. If I'm not mistaken, Jake, you correct me if I'm wrong. The chips need to be removed altogether because they're gonna, use controlled burns in that area, and they can't have the chips there because that would create a situation where there'd be runaway smoldering. So the chips have to be removed off site altogether.
That sounds just right.
Nor do we want to see the soil improve, in quotes, with organic matter, Carlos. It wants to remain as sterile as it reasonably can be.
Yep. Agreed.
Any other questions or comments?
Just one last thing, Dan, and that is, we're sort of on it right now. Obviously, tops and limbs would constitute a pretty serious volume of chips, but there are some individuals on the island who will be willing to take rather large windrows long piles that can be kept from overheating and with spontaneous combustion like John Keane had way back. But there are some individuals who would take the white pine chips, although the white pine chip is not to be compared to an oak chip in terms of a good resource. It's 50% of the carbon recovery or whatever of a oak chip. So
We should start a list if there's individuals willing to take
Yeah.
chips, because that's something we've looked into without much success previously.
there are some people who will do it. So
Yeah.
That would be a good call. Get ahead of it. Get ahead of it.
yeah, I'm glad to see that we're not in business in 2026. I was worried about trying to cram something in 63 days or something.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I mean, if community outreach was done and there's a lot of interest in that resource, then obviously that makes things easier for everyone, I think. So
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jake,
course.
for joining us this afternoon.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Dan, sorry, I thought have we had the audience questions? I didn't know that had started.
We were in the throes of it. Go right ahead, Megan.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm so sorry I missed most of the meeting, and I'm so happy to hear what I've been hearing about dealing with the wood in a sustainable way. What I'm curious about, if anybody from DCR or maybe Dan can talk about dates and permits. Like, I'm sure the cutting plan permit has a time frame that isn't an issue. Maybe you talked about whether the conservation permit needs to be amended or renewed. Are there any things along those lines that you can share today?
So the question is,
Sorry,
Hello?
you cut out for one moment. Go
so
ahead.
the question is, are there any updates on permitting?
Well, are there any deadlines that are going to be impacted by not starting until the fall? I thought there was a deadline of like October 2026 for something, but I couldn't tell you which permit it is.
So, as far as I am aware, I'm sure there will be some things in effect, but usually when permit expires, it's easier to renew it than start anew, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, because of the bid received and everything like that, I'm sure a lot throughout the schedule will be affected. Yeah.
Yeah. So who would be the person to talk to about this particular question about permitting questions that might not just be DCR, could be heritage?
So
you don't have to answer me today. You can just
yeah,
let me I could get your number and give you a buzz.
yeah. So internally, I guess you're welcome to reach out to me. Externally, I can't answer that question. But
Could you
yeah,
look into it, please? And I'll call you.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
So whether it's the conservation permit, the cutting plan permit, whether it has to go way back to earlier permits with the ENF, I don't even know what's in play, but I'd love an answer to that question. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, no worries.
Ben.
Yeah, just kind of in the same category as this, the part of this project was also doing a comprehensive review of Corellis in general. And I think this, pointing back to where Matt was going, where, understanding the systems there are going to give us better chances for figuring out how to manage it properly going forward. With the delay in the cutting, could there be an emphasis on studying those plantations while they're currently standing now before they're removed, just so that we can build on the scientific knowledge that is going to be disturbed when they're cut? And so we can better understand, because there's more than just that single area of plantation. They spread across, and we're seeing the white pine develop elsewhere and become much more endemic in the landscape in mixed oak woodlands. So as we do that comprehensive scientific work, or DCR builds out that plan, maybe this delay gives us an opportunity to gather some scientific information before those cuttings occur in those areas that could inform future management. So just pointing that out to DCR. Does that make sense?
Sounds like an excellent idea to me.
And I think also it might be maybe of interest, Jake, if I pass along the recording to you, would you mind sharing it with of Matt's presentation? Would you mind sharing it with your forest health director? I think it's Nicole, if she's still in that capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, send it over.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, and I would imagine that regardless of the answer to your question, Ben, and I see the value of it, but regardless, I think David Foster estimated, I think about 900 acres of the forest is non-native pine plantation. Of course, not all white pine, but nonetheless, huge, a pretty sizable percentage. So I would imagine that, I would hope that they're going to get some attention in that comprehensive management plan, given how much space they're occupying.
Yeah, and
All
just
right.
concentrate on those areas before they're disturbed, so that we can learn something, before that the effect of the disturbance changes what's there. I mean, 100 years of plantation, and the interaction between the plantations and the natural forest. There's stuff we can learn. Just let's not miss that opportunity.
Right, for sure. Any other questions before we wind down today?
Well, I did have a question, and now I've tried to remember it, Dan. Is my speaker on?
It is. You get the last question today.
Okay. So one of the reasons why this has all evolved is because of the threat of fire. And something else that I'm hoping is going to be part of what Ben was talking about, the management and maintenance plan that the advisory opinion referred to as something that has to be done within a year. Will there be some real focused work on fire management, hardening homes, etc.? And who do we talk to about that?
At our last meeting, I remember Peter Church saying to us that it's absolutely going to integrate, fire management plans that they have in draft status from, previous plans for Corellis.
But there's supposed to be outreach to the property owners that goes way back to 2001. And I know the towns, I understand it's been a long haul, but I'm hoping that's going to be a pretty dynamic aspect of all of this work, and to go sort of into a more innovative approach because of how much more science there is on dealing with fire and property.
I have to give the Forest Fire Bureau some credit here, because, even well before this plantation removal project came along, they've kind of quietly, I only say quietly because they don't get a lot of credit for it, but they are active in their outreach and communication in doing wildfire home risk assessments, offering trainings to get more people trained, but then also free of charge, coming into neighborhoods and doing those home risk assessments. They attend a lot of our events out here, our community events, to build awareness around that. So they have been pretty active on that front, including some of the communities that are in close proximity to Corellis as well.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
All right. Well, thanks for staying over, everyone. I know we ran over time, but nonetheless, good conversation today. And good to have you for the entirety of it, Jake. Thanks for
Of
staying
course,
extra.
happy to help as much as I can without my computer.
All right, Matt, thank you again for a fantastic presentation and, unpacking so many of those findings in a way that even I could understand it.
Is that going to be available?
Yeah, I'm going to post the recording to our website.
I look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good news.
Thank you much.